It's time. Time to rank. What is up, MCU fans? Welcome back to the channel. It has been a while since I've done an MCU ranking, and today we're only talking about the movies, TV shows. Be gone with you.
Get up on out of here!
You've seen so many tier lists on this channel. I'm sick of it. Frankly, I'm done with it. That's a lie. We'll be back with tier lists, but right now, I want to do a classic MCU ranking. Just focus on the movies, the films that we've seen on the big screen, and I want to rank them. And that's what we're going to do. As always, everyone's ranking is going to be different, and this doesn't work unless you guys get in that comment section and leave your rankings. If you don't want to do all of them, do your top 10, your bottom 10. What's your favorite, your least favorite? What movie should be in the MCU? No, don't do that. That's stupid.
You idiot!
If you guys want to support this video, the best way to do that is this thing. And also, there's a super thanks option. If you guys want to ask any questions, we'll answer them in the next MCU video. Here are today's honorable mentions. There are none. There's nothing. Captain Marvel. I don't hate this with every fiber of my being. My God, it's the worst atrocity I've ever seen. It's just plain boring. It's just plain forgettable. And every time I go back and watch it, I get to the point to where I'm just kind of done with it 20 to 30 minutes in because nothing about it stands out and it isn't able to overcome the blandness of the story or of this character. I just don't think Captain Marvel is very interesting in a Captain Marvel movie. And I think Brie Larson is a phenomenal talent. I think she is an Oscar-worthy performer. But in this film, I just don't think she works as the character. Boo! And I always say this, people always give me crap for it. I think she is better in the Avengers movies than she is in her own film. And some people say, well, she filmed this before she filmed her own movie, Austin. It's not like she got better. Yeah, but the difference here is the directors. And I don't know if the directors of Captain Marvel did a good enough job of bringing out the proper performance. And one thing I think is interesting about the trailer for the Marvels is she looks like she's giving a good, compelling performance. So that is one reason why I think that movie could be really good. I'm not overly excited for it, but I hope that aspect is better. But when it comes to Captain Marvel, I just think it's the bland, forgettable story. You have some of the backtracking with Nick Fury's character. Nick Fury's good in this movie, and the backstory for Captain Marvel is interesting. Unfortunately, everything else is just, it's one note and forgettable. Speaking of one note and forgettable, I feel the exact same way about Thor: The Dark World. That is, it's a competition for which movie is worse in my mind. Frankly, I go back and forth every time I think about it. And it's less so the fact that Thor is, as bland as maybe I was just speaking of, but Thor is bland in this movie compared to the rest of the MCU. Even his first film, there's nothing that interesting that happens to his character, right? I like that relationship between he and Jane, but I like it more so where it goes later on. And I felt that there was so much they could have done in this movie with that relationship, but I'm watching, I'm going, well, what's the point of all of this? And then you get the villains and the dark elves, and they're not entertaining. They're bland. I thought that main performance was frankly terrible. It's like the guy didn't want to be there, and there's really nothing that stands out with this one other than that Thor and Loki dynamic, that relationship, and the death was really impactful. But it wasn't really a death. I mean, it was obvious that it wasn't a death, but then you get that post-credit scene. It's kind of like, okay, so even the best part of this film doesn't really matter at the end of things. And they do go back to this in Avengers Endgame, and I thought that was interesting, but it doesn't make this experience any better. And frankly, the portal battle and the Loki relationship, it's the only two things I'm going to remember. What else happened?
Nothing.
You'll like him when he's angry. That's actually pretty good. The Incredible Hulk. Edward Norton's pretty good as Bruce Banner. Tim Roth is pretty good in this movie. Frankly, I thought the casting for General Ross, and they carried that over into the MCU, as they are a lot of these characters in the next Captain America movie, they're all pretty good, and I feel like this movie is at least distinctly different from the rest of the MCU Phase 1 projects. It has this darkness to it. I don't think the direction's all that good until we get to that final battle, that final fight scene, which elevates this from being possibly the worst MCU movie into something that's still not a great movie, but that fight scene in the third act is awesome. And it's not even that Edward Norton was recast. Here's my issue with the film. Betty Ross, Bruce Banner, that relationship, that dialogue, that lack of chemistry, it's evident in this film. And frankly, I thought it was one of the worst, most bland romances I've ever seen. It feels good to get this off my chest. It's so therapeutic. I know some people are going to hate this, but this movie came out before I started my channel, and I've always defended it because I watched it back in the day, and I'm like, oh, that final fight was great. And then I went back and rewatched it more recently, and I thought, that final fight is still great, but boy, there's no chemistry between these two actors. And boy, the dialogue, I think it's the dialogue. I think that's the issue. It's bland, generic, early 2000s rom-com dialogue without the comedy, and it's more so just boring. Without that, I think this movie could have actually been good. And it sounds like I hate it. I don't hate this film. I think it's but I think it's because of the issues I presented. Let's move on. How about Black Widow? Of all the movies we've talked about so far, this has the best first act. I love the spy espionage feel. I think Florence Pugh gives an amazing performance, and learning more about Natasha's backstory is really cool. Would it have been more impactful a few years ago before she died? Sure. But that also adds something to the story itself. And I enjoyed all of the characters introduced. I thought David Harbour did a great job. Rachel Weisz, she's an amazing actress, but I did not love the character itself. And then we get into the third act, and it's a big, bombastic, CGI, green screen-filled explosion fest. It's unnecessary. It tried to be a huge blockbuster when I loved the simplicity of what we got in the first half of the movie. But unfortunately, it's all tarnished by the final act of the movie, which is not only unmemorable, but it's full of action sequences we've seen 1,000 times before. And then, her falling through the air. I'm just like, why is this so over the top?
Too much of it, darling, too much.
So the beautiful thing about movies is sometimes your thoughts will change. They can change. Yes, they can be influenced by outside forces, but sometimes you just watch a movie and you start to realize that a lot of these problems that have been presented do actually exist, and your vision's also clouded by other things that you see. And after seeing Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I look back at a movie like Thor: Love and Thunder, and I'm thinking, why couldn't we get that? Right? Thor: Love and Thunder, I think, had really good ideas, and I'm still willing to defend that third act and some things that happen in the third act, especially Thor and Jane's storyline. I thought Jane's storyline was handled really well. I also think this movie gets too much hate. People trying to say, well, it's the worst comic book movie of all time. No, it's not. But it is one of the worst MCU movies, and unfortunately, my enthusiasm has kind of died down on this. The more times I've watched it 3 times now, and every time I watch it, substantially, I see more issues, and you also start to notice that the flaws that maybe I had the first time around, but they become more hard-hitting because they overshadow what I thought was good about the movie in the first place. And Taika Waititi, who I still believe is a great director, just kind of treats this like a joke. And, I think my love of Ragnarok, it had me so excited for this movie, and I walked out like, okay, that part was funny. The screaming goats, I never liked the screaming goats. I never liked this or that. But there are some good moments. And there are still some good moments. But the moments that are so bad continue to get worse and worse. And the more I watch it, and you guys know how my scores work when I score movies, that resonate score, it goes down. The story score, it goes down. The visual score, and that became more evident when I watched it on Disney Plus as opposed to, watching it on the big screen. That goes down. And by the time it all goes down, you're thinking to yourself, man, I don't think this is a very good movie. Even Christian Bale, an amazing performance. I thought he was awesome as Gore the God Butcher. But where's the God butchering? There's no God butchering in this movie. It all happens off screen. And that sucks. As a whole, just a massive disappointment. Mediocre. Iron Man 2, another film that I don't hate. I don't hate this. I don't really hate. Angry hate, like. I don't feel that way about any movie in the MCU, but this one is a bridge movie. Iron Man 2 is a bridge from the movies prior to the Avengers. And we're working on, obviously, Tony Stark's role in the Avengers, but we're also setting up and building what the Avengers is going to be about with Nick Fury, with Agent Coulson, with all of those cool little Easter eggs at the end. That was cool, by the way, and I thought Justin Hammer was a great character, and I hope we see more of him in the MCU's future. But beyond Justin Hammer, we have Whiplash, which could have been an amazing villain, and the scene during the race is one of the cooler scenes we've ever seen with Iron Man, from him putting on his suit to the battle itself. But beyond that, there is so much going on in this movie. It frankly becomes, I don't want to say overwhelming, but just kind of like, oh, what are we doing here?
What is going on here?
The introduction with War Machine is cool, and then the stuff with Pepper Potts is nice, but there are kind of two distinct storylines, and then you have what Tony is dealing with personally. You have all of the villainous storylines, the introduction to the Avengers, Agent Coulson, and what he's making Tony Stark do, and by the time you get to the end of it, there's just a lot going on. Now, I believe if you start to parse through these stories, a lot of people are going to find things that they like, and that's the reason why I've kind of elevated Iron Man 2 just a bit over the years, but I still don't feel that strongly about it because, again, it just feels like a bridge film, but in a way, it's not as bad as some of the things we've gotten more recently. Ant-Man and the Wasp, a lot of people really enjoy this film. It's got good scores across the board. I'm just not a big fan. I think it's bland and forgettable. I think this is one of those stories that happened at the most inopportune time. I understand that because it was right after Avengers Infinity War, but, at the same time, those stakes at any point while watching this film would not have been as drastic because the storyline just isn't all that interesting. Here's what I appreciate about Ant-Man and the Wasp. I appreciate the fact that it takes place in the real world. So when you're looking at scale, the scale of Ant-Man, the scale of Wasp, and you're seeing it compared to things that we recognize, that stands out. And that's something I was missing in Quantumania. But unlike Quantumania, the villains in this movie, they are so forgettable. And the storyline, I can't even remember what the storyline is. And I rewatched this recently. I couldn't tell you. Walton Goggins, completely wasted in this film. And it's just one of those movies that you watch, you're chuckling because all of the characters are so funny. I love the fact that they still have Luis, they still have that crew. That's great. And there are moments from that, but the entire third act of the film, bland, forgettable. I'm reusing the same words over and over, but there are just no stakes in the third act of this movie. And Ant-Man and the Wasp, while not a terrible film by any means, and there are still so many things to laugh at and appreciate with this movie, as a whole, as an entire package, it just feels like a schlocky, forgettable blockbuster.
Hey, take it easy.
I didn't love it. I do love the moment where Ant-Man goes into school. That's hilarious. And Wasp, she is really good in this movie, but they also dumbed down Paul Rudd's Ant-Man, and he's kind of an idiot in this film. And I'm like, that's not who he was in the first movie. And then Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. I don't hate this film. I really don't. I know a lot of people, they watch this, and this is one of the lowest rated movies on Letterboxd, I'm pretty sure, and I understand why. I do think there are a lot of things to like, and I like dumb humor. I can't help myself. I love that Rick and Morty style of humor, and they have the same writer here writing for this movie, and so when you get all of the things with Darren, a.k.a. MODOK, they're dumb. I get it, they're dumb, and people memed them, and they put it on Twitter, and they're saying how stupid it is, and I get it, but I'm sitting here going, it's dumb, but it's kind of enjoyable, and I didn't hate that moment, to be honest with you. And even after going back and rewatching the movie itself, it's a mess, okay? Regardless of what happens with Jonathan Majors, if we're just talking about his performance in this movie, I think he elevated the film. I think that storyline made the movie so much better. I liked the villainous presence because of that, and I think that final battle with Ant-Man is actually really compelling and entertaining. But again, unfortunately, I keep using that word, the movie's just kind of inconsistent, I think tonally, all over the place. Also, the more that I thought about it, the more I'm like, oh, they kind of wasted both Michael Douglas and Evangeline Lilly. It's Ant-Man and the Wasp, but she's not really, I get it, they're focusing on the other Wasp, Michelle Pfeiffer.
Look out, Michelle Pfeiffer.
Michelle Pfeiffer was great in this movie, but Evangeline Lilly, what did she do? And Michael Douglas, what did he do? I don't know. Next up, Eternals, a movie that some people say is the most bland entry and outing in the MCU. I don't know how people say that when Thor: The Dark World exists, or even when some of those other movies I talked about existed.
I disagree.
It's not a bad outing from Chloe Zhao. I don't hate this movie. I understand a lot of people, they didn't like it because it doesn't thoroughly fit the tone of what the MCU was prior to this. I enjoy the fact that they're going outside of the box on this one and introducing brand new characters. Unfortunately, when you've already done that with Guardians of the Galaxy, and that movie was so entertaining and so good, and then you try to do that with Eternals, and the characters may not be as compelling as those characters, and it's just kind of, it's a bit of a darker story that we're introducing here, and then what happens at the end, and the fact that they've still... I guess they're going to, the rumor is they're going to do it in the next Captain America movie, but they've not referenced this. What happened?
What happened?
But I like the idea that there are these Guardians that existed. No one really knew about them. Yes, that's just a way for them to kind of shoehorn them into the MCU, but it's also just a really interesting story. And, you know, some of the characters were really cool, really interesting. Other members of this team, a little bland, a little forgettable. Regardless, I do think Eternals has some things going for it. Chloe Zhao is a really good director. The final battles that took place were all really entertaining. It's just not one of the more memorable movies in the MCU, and I understand a lot of people didn't like the way that the story was told. I can understand why. So all in all, Eternals, just pretty good. I didn't hate it. Iron Man 3. I've kind of come around on this movie just a little bit. This is one of those that has grown on me because I've started to realize this is a Tony Stark story instead of an Iron Man story. He has to do without the suit. He has to overcome not having the suit. So I'm kind of like, oh, that's interesting. That's pretty good. And I like the fact that it stands out more so than Iron Man 2 as a story. He has the help from the young kid, the one that we see at the funeral. Everybody's like, who's that kid? That's the kid from Iron Man 3. The Mandarin twist, you know, some people were like, this is a horrible twist. And at first, I was a little taken aback because I'm a big comic book fan, and I'm like, I don't like the twist. And I still don't love the twist. And I don't love what they did with that character. Frankly, I think it's a little ridiculous. And then the third act of this film, you know, you have the idea of him without the suit, and then you have him with all of the suits at the end, and the fact that they're so indestructible. And I'm like, why are they doing that with the suits? I don't love what they do with Pepper, and I don't love the fact that they never acknowledge that again. But the simplicity of the first two acts combined with what the third act means to Tony, that actually worked for me. So this movie, it's grown on me just a little bit. Thor. Dutch angles. Look, it's a Dutch angle. Yeah, it's the movie of Dutch angles, and Kenneth Branagh, he goes a little crazy with those, to be honest with you. But the relationship with him and Loki is amazing in this film. I think Loki is a quality villain. The idea that he tries to rise to power when Odin goes into Odin sleep. That's pretty cool. He's just got such a good slithery, villainous presence in this first movie, and it works in opposition with what Thor is, this grand, epic character. And when he goes to Earth and loses his powers, once again stripping powers away from the character that we know and love, like Iron Man 3, that's pretty great. Fish out of water, that works. Some of the humor that comes from that. The Destroyer, and then some of the villainous characters, you know, not the best, other than Loki in this film. And, you know, the story, it's fairly simple. But I watched this movie and I'm like, I love what they did with the look of Asgard. I love how grand and epic they try to be, and it works for me. Very simple, but I think simple is okay for a movie like this, and a nice introduction to a character that has grown so much since he's been in the MCU. I enjoyed Thor. He's pretty good. Avengers Age of Ultron, the definitive worst Avengers movie, but also a film that I think gets a lot of hate for no good reason. It's still entertaining. I still love the villainous presence of Ultron. I like the fact that our characters, they have to go into hiding in the midst of this movie. That's pretty cool, but they're doing it as a team, and they're talking things out a bit more, and there is this epicness to the third act of the film that is a bit of a rehash of the first Avengers. I get it, but it works. As time has moved on, and I've seen the MCU do things that are significantly worse than this, I think my admiration for this movie has grown just a bit. And yes, I think Ultron should have been more than what he was, but you have the perfect voice, you have the perfect presence, and what we get from him is really good. It's just a couple of missed opportunities in there. I'm like, they could have made this on the level of a Loki, but it wasn't on the level of a Loki, and frankly, what they did with Ultron in the What If series, even though I didn't love that series as a whole, that episode, or those episodes, were really good. You guys remember seeing that trailer for the first time? It's still one of my favorite trailers in the MCU. I was on cloud 9. Movie's not that good. Next up, we have Doctor Strange 2. This is the multiverse of madness, people. It's mad. Do I think this movie could do for a title change? yeah, wasn't really the multiverse of madness. It was more Doctor Strange versus Wanda, and then it gets a little scary towards the end, but we never really go into other multiverses except for one, and that one was full of some cameos that have since turned into memes. So I don't think this film did what Marvel wanted it to do, but I do think Sam Raimi shines as a director here. He brings it from the perspective of this movie is different compared to other Marvel films, and I appreciate that. Is it exactly what I thought Doctor Strange 2 should be? No, but I actually enjoyed the experience, and I liked how distinct this film feels, even though it did not fully come together. Next up is one that's kind of been up and down my rankings through the years. I've always really enjoyed Far From Home. I think it's a fun sequel that struggles in the beginning with its humor. It's just not nearly as funny as it wants to be, but once it settles down and you get that twist with Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio, then it becomes more entertaining and very different compared to what we knew from Spider-Man at that point. And I like the fact that he's recovering and reeling from the death of Iron Man. Spoilers for that. They do the twist that every comic fan saw coming, but I like the way it was handled, and I think Jake Gyllenhaal is a rock star in this movie. He makes it better than it could have been. Overall, this is a fun sequel. I thoroughly enjoy it. Ant-Man 1. Yeah, this is the first one. I thoroughly enjoy this film. This was a beautiful beginning for a character that I have really had a great time with over the years. No, his trilogy's not the best trilogy in the MCU, but what do you expect from Ant-Man? Well, I expect a lot. He's a great character in the comics. You know what? They went the Scott Lang route. He's the focus in this movie. He is a beautiful mixture of smart yet hilarious, quippy with an awesome crew. I even enjoyed the presence of Yellowjacket as a villain. The story is simple. It's scaled down. It really is scaled down because he's an ant, but I think there's a nice emotional core. It's not perfect, and the pacing struggles at times, but all in all, I would say for some people, this movie is underrated, even though it's a little lower down my list.
Hey, that's pretty good.
All right, people are going to give me crap for putting Black Panther below Wakanda Forever, but I just think the task of Wakanda Forever and the story, for me, was more impactful. The first Black Panther is still great. Chadwick Boseman is amazing as this character, and Michael B. Jordan as the villain, as well as Andy Serkis, they both knock it out of the park. My issues with Black Panther, and the reason it's a bit lower than maybe it used to be, is because in that third act, it turns into this big CGI battle, a similar issue to what I have with Black Widow, but the difference is in Black Panther, there are more emotional stakes. So when you get that rubbery looking CGI and, some fight sequences that aren't on the level of what Ryan Coogler was able to bring to the characters themselves, I can overlook that. I'm still having a good time with it. I'm just not sure if this story is more impactful than some of the movies I put above it. Regardless, the performances, what it did at the box office, the impact of what this movie meant, I still thoroughly enjoy it. I will never emotionally recover from the final moment in this film with Yondu. It is devastating.
Yondu, what are you doing? You can't.
Emotional, damn it!
Seriously, we just rewatched this in preparation for Guardians Volume 3, and I've always found it to be the weakest of the 2 Guardians movies, now the 3 Guardians movies, but that's only because the humor, kind of like Far From Home, just doesn't work nearly as well in this movie compared to the first. You have some of those ongoing jokes, like the not ripe joke. That kind of got tired after a while, and there are just certain moments that I'm not chuckling at like I should be. But the emotional crux of the story, the father-son relationship with Ego, who I think is a good villain, that final battle was really fun, and everything that's happening with Yondu, with Gamora, with Nebula, man, that is a really good time. Overall, Guardians Volume 2, it's just a blast to watch, nitpicks included. What I would consider maybe the most underrated movie in the MCU, because people just don't talk about it. They're like, Winter Soldier, Civil War, and yeah, those movies are great. But the first Avenger is an awesome introduction with Captain America. I love what they did with Steve Rogers. My only big criticism is that they highlight through some integral moments, and I'm like, we could have expanded on a lot of that, but we don't. Regardless, I still have a great time every time I watch First Avenger. Red Skull, man, underrated villain. We don't talk about Red Skull until he pops back up in the Avengers movies, which is pretty cool. It's also really emotional, man, what they do with Stanley Tucci's character when he dies. Anytime Stanley Tucci dies, it's sad.
Emotional!
That Peggy Carter, Steve Rogers relationship, then when he crashes in the ice and he's on the phone with her, it was a radio, it wasn't a phone, but they're crying, and, well, I was crying. They weren't crying. What happened? So all throughout this recent phase of the MCU, we have a movie that's not great, and then, the MCU is back, and then, the MCU is dead again, and then they're back, and then they're dead again. And the same thing happened when Wakanda Forever came out. It's like, the MCU's back, and then Quantumania came out. It's, they're dead again. But I don't think Wakanda Forever is remembered at this point as a movie that was starting to recover the MCU. I mean, I think this movie really worked for what it was trying to do. And I think the biggest reason why I respect and appreciate this film is because they had to work around, obviously, what happened to Chadwick Boseman. And the task that Ryan Coogler had with this film is immense, ridiculously large. He not only overcame it, I think he knocked it out of the park. Yeah, there were some things in there, right? I wish we wouldn't have went to America as much as we did, just kept it, because there were a lot of storylines in this film, too many at times, even though I do love Martin Freeman's character, but we could have done without that. Regardless, the impact of passing the mantle, Angela Bassett's performance, Shuri's character, and Namor, who I thought was a great villain, I think this movie will continue to go overlooked. And unpopular opinion, I think it's a tighter story than the first one. How about the first Doctor Strange? Even though I enjoyed Multiverse of Madness more than a lot of people, it's not as great as I wanted it to be. It did cause me to go back and look at this first Doctor Strange and say, I guess simplicity is a really good thing, as well as overcoming a bad villain. This movie overcomes a bad villain. That's by far my biggest criticism. Really my only major critique of this movie. Mads Mikkelsen, at least he's giving a good performance, even though I didn't care about that character. But the fight sequences, learning how to hone in his powers, what the Ancient One does in this film, what happens to Stephen Strange, I really enjoy this movie. It's so much fun to watch, and Dormammu, I've come to bargain. That's one of the coolest moments in the MCU. I'll fight for that any day of the week, and Scott Derrickson's impact was really felt in this film. Spider-Man Homecoming. This is just a really fun introduction. This movie came out, I think, at the perfect time. I was just graduating from college, so I was able to watch this and say, man, I miss being a kid. I miss being even a college student at that point, because they're just having so much in this film. Peter and Ned, and, you know, Zendaya's MJ, I'd say that's the weakest aspect of the movie for me. I didn't love her presence. She gets much better in the next few films, but their relationship, what they do, and the comedy of Homecoming way surpasses the comedy of Far From Home for me. And when they're in high school, that's actually my favorite aspect of this movie, because it plays like a John Hughes type of film. And then you have Michael Keaton's villain, Vulture. Not the best action sequences in the world, but we didn't need to have that. Couple of great moments with Peter and that back and forth between what Vulture is doing, what Spider-Man is trying to do. For me, Homecoming comes together beautifully. It's a cool origin story, if you want to call it that. Not really. Shang-Chi. We're not sleeping on Shang-Chi in this house. Isn't that right, honey? I think she's asleep. So she's actually sleeping on it. It's another one of those movies. The MCU's dead. Oh, it's Shang-Chi. Simu Liu is really, really good in this film. Even Awkwafina. I've had issues with her presence in movies in the past. No issues here. I think her presence is great. And some of that humor that comes from her character is warranted in the more intense moments, because Sean, his dad, is the Mandarin, and we're slowly starting to figure these things out as we go. This movie also makes Iron Man 3 better for me. You also have the inclusion of Ben Kingsley, and you know, a lot of people want to say it gets a little ridiculous in the third act. They go into this crazy world, and okay, what are we doing here? What are these fight sequences about? They are ridiculous, yes, but they're really entertaining. The CGI is awesome. There's a dragon fight. It's just a really fun film. You know, it kind of slows down, meanders in the second act, but I can't wait to see more from this little corner of the MCU. The first Avengers, #1, the one that started it all, one of the greatest movie experiences of my life. I could say that about 3 out of the 4 Avengers films, but in this one, we ran out of the theater so happy. My friend and I jumped on top of a car and started celebrating. Why did I do it? I was a dumb kid. And whose car was it? I don't remember. Somebody's going to comment and say, it was my car. Comment if it was your car. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't have to say anything. Joss Whedon, he did what he had to do. He brought these characters together. It's a little cartoonish. At times, it's shot like a TV movie. Who cares? This movie has great humor, great dialogue. Everyone comes together so naturally. They all fit in perfectly. The tone is perfection. The third act is an absolute blast. You know, I don't know if the narrative is as strong. 11 years later, you can start to see the nitpicks and the issues that people have, but who cares? It's the first Avengers. It's a freaking great time.
I love you. I love you.
The magic that this first movie has, man, and I think it's the shock factor of who are these characters? A raccoon in a tree? It's so stupid, but it's so brilliant. And I kind of know about these characters. I was familiar with the comics, but I wasn't really invested in the Guardians comics. I knew Drax more from that Marvel Legends video game that I had on the Nintendo DS. Man, that was a fun game. What was the name of that? Nemesis? Marvel Nemesis? Did you guys play that? But then I learned who these characters were from the performances, and now I can never associate anyone else with a Drax, with a Gamora, with a Star-Lord. Bradley Cooper's voice is Rocket Raccoon, and the fact that I can say that about every character in this movie, at least the ones that are part of the team, that's ridiculous. John C. Reilly's in this movie. They got John C. Reilly in the MCU. You gotta applaud. Glenn Close, can't forget her.
Marvin and Clones. Glenn Close.
My only nitpick with Guardians Volume 1, there's not too much story, the pacing's not an issue. Ronan's just not the best villain in the world. He's by far the weakest out of the 3 movies, but the focus is on the team, and I respect that. James Gunn knows how to handle a movie like this. Clearly, at least I hope so, because he's doing the DC movies. I've had some amazing experiences in the theaters over the years. Let me tell you, have you ever seen 50 Shades of Grey? Obviously the Avengers movies, but right behind that, watching this with a group of friends, 3 of my best friends from high school, and all of their girlfriends and wives. Most of them didn't really know what was going on. My wife knew. I knew. Devin knew. Sam knew. Chris knew. We all knew what was going on. And when freaking Tobey freaking Maguire, Andrew Garfield, Tom Holland, I mean, they're all on screen at the same time. We're freaking out. We're losing our minds. I had already went to a critic screening, but even the critics at the critic screening were freaking out. And then I go to a fan screening. Everybody there's freaking out. And then I go see it again. Everybody there's freaking out. It's one of those movie experiences you don't want to miss it with a crowd. And okay, how does it hold up on second, third, fourth watch? Well, we're completing the arc here. This is Tom Holland, aka his version of Peter Parker's coming-of-age story coming to a close. He is now the Peter Parker that we know and love from the comics. He is now the Spider-Man that we always knew he could be, and he's no longer going to be relying on the perks of being an Avenger and a 3-movie arc as an origin story. I didn't know that's what we were in for, but as soon as I saw No Way Home, I'm like, yeah, that is what we were in for. Yes, it was an excuse to bring back Alfred Molina and Willem Dafoe, but you get a performance from Willem Dafoe in this film that is just as good, if not better, as his performance in the Tobey Spider-Man. He's an amazing villain. The villainous presence in this movie in general is awesome. And when everybody comes together at the end, that's great. But some of the lighter moments in the first 2 acts, I think, are really fun to see it all play out. As a whole, No Way Home, you know. People say this movie's overrated. That's fine, but nothing will ever compromise that experience that I had. And so the fact that I have this high, it speaks to how much this movie has stuck with me over the last week or 2. How long's it been? 2 weeks now, I think. And I'm going to go see it again this weekend. That's 3 times. That's the most I've seen any movie this year. It's not my number 1 of the year, but it's like slowly creeping. It's in my top 3. Look, I had an amazing time with Guardians Volume 3. It's such a beautiful final chapter in this story, even though we know it's not going to be the final chapter. But for what this team is right now, the makeup of the team, it does feel like a final chapter, and the emotional resonance of each individual character, the idea of James Gunn having so much passion for these characters, you can see it, you can feel it in this film. The High Evolutionary, his presence is scary. I mean, he's a terrifying villain, and he works so well for what his role is, his goal is in this movie. But Rocket Raccoon, I mean, he's the MVP. I could say Nebula, I could say Mantis, I could say Star-Lord, I could say Drax. I could go on for days because every character is handled so beautifully. My big criticism walking out of the movie for the first time is, yeah, there's a lot going on. Let's see how it manages to come together on a second watch. In the second watch, I didn't have as big of a pacing problem as I did, and it definitely stuck with me more than I thought it would after watching it for the first time. The soundtrack is amazing. One of the coolest action sequences in the MCU. There's still a lot of story and a couple of, I don't want to say specifically in case you haven't seen it, fake out moments. One too many, in my opinion. Didn't quite love that, but I do like the unpredictability of this story. James Gunn caught me off guard more than a few times, and that's appreciated. So did Guardians 3 save the MCU after it's been saved 4 times in the last 2 years? I mean, I guess, but this movie warrants success. It is one of my favorites since Avengers Endgame, and I really had a great time. Iron Man, I had my wisdom teeth taken out once, and I was really high. My friend asked me, who's your favorite superhero? And I said,
Wait, so what'd you say your favorite superhero was? You're sleeping again.
No. Iron Man.
Iron Man, cool.
He's so cool. Hey, we're gonna go.
Yeah.
We're gonna go. Can you fix that light? Can you fix that? I can't see a darn thing. Turn this lamp on.
Now that's shifted and changed over the years. Captain America is my favorite now, but at the time, this movie was so good it shifted my entire belief system when it came to Marvel characters. I always said, I love Spider-Man, Venom, the Hulk, and as soon as I saw Iron Man, I'm like, I love Iron Man. I mean, that's what this movie did. An amazing origin story. The perfect origin story. And it's crazy because you hear Jon Favreau talk, and it's like, yeah, the behind the scenes was kind of a disaster, and we did a lot of stuff on the fly, and I'm like, how? It's a miracle this movie worked, but it launched the MCU, even though it felt so grounded. You got Jeff Bridges as a villain. He's great. You know, the third act fight, it's not the craziest third act fight you've ever seen. It's a little generic by nature, but the whole movie from top to bottom is grounded. It works. Some great emotion there. We can never forget Jensen. Don't forget Jensen.
You bastards!
The movie that preceded Thor: Love and Thunder. People hate that one, but they love this one, don't they? Okay, I think some people have turned on Ragnarok over the years, and yeah, he's not as serious as he used to be. Good. Thor is interesting in this film. He's way more interesting in Infinity War, Endgame, and this movie than he ever has been, maybe ever will be again. I mean, he's interesting in Love and Thunder, but obviously that's not as good of a story as Ragnarok is. Ragnarok was not a parody of itself. Ragnarok didn't feel overly satirical. There's just enough humor in here to suffice, but it knocks that humor out of the park. And then you have all of the emotional trauma that Thor is going through, as well as some great characters from top to bottom. Jeff freaking Goldblum's in this movie, and he's great. But obviously, Cate Blanchett. Obviously, Loki's role. Obviously, how they all come together to create the Revengers at the end. But man, that rainbow fight sequence, and when he comes down and the song playing, and it's magical, man. It's a top 5 moment in the MCU, and this movie for me, every time I watch it. For a while, it got better. Now, it's about as good as it's always going to be. But man, I have a great time with Ragnarok every time I watch it.
Oh, boy! Yeah!
Austin, you're so cliche. You and the Russo brothers, you might as well just, I don't know. I can't help it. Their style, within the confines of the MCU, let's make that clear. Their style is perfect. I think they are masterful when it comes to making comic book movies, and Civil War is the least great example of that, but it's still a great example of that. I think Civil War is amazing, and it's the one that people aren't talking about as much as the other 3 films. Look, I love the other 3 films, but you have to remember, Civil War set the table for what Infinity War and Endgame ended up being. It raised the stakes to a level that we had never seen in the MCU. Heroes taking on heroes, and they went for blood. I mean, this wasn't like, buddy, pal, idiots. The airport fight is amazing for obvious reasons. As a comic book fan, that kind of blew my mind at the time. But for me, it's more so Iron Man versus Winter Soldier, Captain America. That's an emotional fight. It has every emotion that you could ask for. The one where he's seeing his parents being killed. That's hard stuff, man. That's a very heavy moment. The Russo brothers did it. They nailed it. I think Civil War is great. And Zemo, he slept on in this film. Avengers Endgame, the ultimate finale, the culmination of everything we've been building up in the MCU. This is it. It has come to a head. And this is a magical, magical movie. It's 3 hours. Each act is distinct and different. It's an apocalyptic movie. It's sci-fi. It's time travel. It's a war at the end. That's what it is. When everybody's coming together and you get all of those individual moments with the heroes and the characters, and he gets the hammer, and then Thor's doing the thing, and Iron Man's... Yeah! The screenplay, not the script. The screenplay is a little all over the place at times, but you have enough heartbreak and emotion, some deaths in there, some people that fortunately didn't stay dead, but Black Widow... she's dead. But that hit, and then the obvious one, Iron Man, that hit really hard. The battle, there are stakes, there are emotions, some things in there that, it's a little cliche. Who cares? Who cares? It's just the ultimate geek out superhero movie for people who have invested literally their entire lives, some people, into this franchise, and it was the culmination. I don't think we'll ever get a culmination this good again. I just don't think Secret Wars, they'll be fun, and I'm excited to see where they go with it, but it's not going to be Endgame. Endgame did it as good as it could have done it and provided me everything I needed at the time. Let's scale it down just a little bit. Not Ant-Man size, but how about Winter Soldier size? This is a, scaled back, easy, simple narrative to digest. It's a spy espionage story with Captain America, and everything's changed here. Even the costume. It's really cool. But it's a really quiet movie in the beginning. Then we realize there's this deep state thing going on and some things, happen. People infiltrating the government. And Robert Redford playing this villain, Alexander Pierce, he's somebody who is slept on. But then you have Winter Soldier, the return of Bucky Barnes, the shock factor that brings our characters, obviously as a comic book fan. I knew that was coming, but it was still a great reveal. And the third act, some people have that similar criticism of, they tried to go too big with the big action sequences, but I didn't feel that hurt this movie. Yeah, they do go bigger, but it's more visually than it is narrative-wise, because the narrative is simple. I got an email. There's still one goal in this movie, and all of our characters are trying to achieve that goal. We get our first fight sequence with Falcon. We get Captain America versus Winter Soldier. Everything that's happening with Nick Fury. That was great. Don't love the fake-out death, but at the time, didn't bother me. It's actually not an issue with this movie. I don't love that in general. I have a hard time finding flaws with Winter Soldier. I really do. I've looked for them in the past. This is everything I want in a superhero movie. It really is. It was simple, it was shocking, and I said it earlier, my favorite superhero is Captain America. Why is that? It's this film. This made me fall in love with Steve Rogers, this performance as Steve Rogers, and everything about the character. I love it with everything in me. It's one of my favorite superhero movies of all time, but it's not number one anymore.
Why is Infinity War number one? I thought Winter Soldier was number one, Austin. You can't make up your mind? You crazy?
I love the simplicity of Winter Soldier, but this Infinity War for me is an upgrade over the first Avengers, meaning a very similarly structured story. You're bringing heroes together, in this case, back together, but you're meeting new ones, and there are many, many more than there were in the first Avengers, but it's the editing, it's the direction, it's the way all of this is handled, and it's the build-up to those two massive fights at the end, one versus Thanos, the other versus Thanos' army. Yeah, it's cannon fodder. I get that, but your heroes need people to fight, okay, or creatures. They need creatures to fight. My only real nitpick is Bruce Banner in the Hulkbuster armor. It looks bad at times, like his floating green screeny head. I don't like that, but other than that, well, and I feel like we should have gotten more Hulk. Other than that, this is the most epic experience I've ever had in the theater. It is epic beyond belief, because when Thanos defeats all of the Avengers and comes to Earth looking for Vision and gets that final Infinity Stone, everything, Silvestri's score, the Russo's direction, the characters getting taken out one by one, and then all of that building up to the snap. It's one of the craziest things that any blockbuster has ever done. It was monumental. I get chills. I'm getting chills just talking about it. I still can't believe they did it. And I can't believe they pulled it off. Yeah, we got the internet. We understand. Okay, obviously the characters are going to come back eventually. We knew that. But deep down in all of our cores, even though we knew it, part of us is like, well, I don't know, man. I know, but I don't know. It's unbelievable that they pulled it off. Unbelievable. A monumental event in the comics. I can't believe they did it. To this day, I can't believe they did it. And I haven't even mentioned this. A lot of the movie is from the perspective of Thanos. We get Thanos' entire story, that relationship with Gamora and Nebula and everything important from the perspective of the villain, and, giving us one of the greatest villainous performances of all time. Josh Brolin will never be appreciated enough. Thanos was everything we built him up to be. It was incredible. It was amazing. And I'm blown away. Every time I watch the movie, when we get to that moment, I'm just like, this is perfection, man.
It was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
Honestly, my top 5 or 6 are ridiculously interchangeable, even though I don't know if anything will ever surpass Winter Soldier or Infinity War. But my entire top 10 movies that I absolutely love. And the fact that Guardians Volume 3 has already made its way into that conversation after 2 watches, it's pretty impressive. It's pretty cool. This was a long list. Like I said, not everyone's going to agree. But if you want to support this video, one of the bigger videos I've done on this channel in a while, dropping that thumbs up, it would mean so much to me if you do it. But if you don't, it's fine. Thanks so much for watching. It's been a while since I've done a ranking. I'm going to go run a marathon. Just kidding. I'm going to go nap because I'm tired. Thanks for watching. See you soon.